And we're back on Thanksgiving morning at 5:20 a.m. Why are we here? Why am I here? Why are you here? Why are any of us here? Like we never left. Welcome to the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you all for spending some of this insanely early Thanksgiving morning here with me in New York. But once again, we're going to skip past all that promotional jazz, get right to the guts of the episode. Well, today is the 40th anniversary of a major motion picture, a key film within, some people say it's the greatest movie franchise ever, where most of the films are of very high quality with, I would say, only one exception. It is, of course, not just the Rocky saga, but on this day, 1985, Sly goes to Russia to beat up on those pesky and evil Russians. Rocky IV had all of the jingoistic elements, this is us against them, all that stuff. They weren't trying to hide it. There's not that much subtext. There's a little subtext, but just in different areas. This is USA versus Russia, and somehow our guy, Robert Rocky Balboa, goes into hostile territory in Russia, and forget about winning the fight. Rocky's on the receiving end so far, but he's here to fight. But somehow, because it's Stallone in that era, and because this is, after all, a fairy tale fantasy, there's no connection to reality whatsoever. This movie would posit you would have a strawweight against Vladimir Klitschko or Tyson Fury, and the strawweight would be knocked down 15 times and somehow end up on top. But not only that, it's a little like The Running Man 2 years later, where the bloodthirsty TV audience is rooting for the stalkers to kill our guy and Stallone's buddy Arnold Schwarzenegger as Ben Richards. They're betting on Richards out there. Well, in the world of Rocky IV, somehow, some way, the Russian faithful end up pulling for the American. Now, there's so much to unpack, but Rocky IV got trashed by critics. It's sitting at a big 39% on Rotten Tomatoes. Now, we talked about the fact that there are a lot of Stallone movies. In fact, almost every movie from his sort of salad days, other than Rocky I, and you can argue Rocky II or Rocky III, but Rocky III to me is a guilty pleasure movie, and I would argue that Rocky IV, in either the theatrical cut or the director's cut, it's a guilty pleasure movie. It's complete ridicularity. But 39% on Rotten Tomatoes, it just means it was not a critic's movie. This is a rah-rah, let's fucking go kind of movie. And if you want to call it pro-America, whatever, certainly that's been discussed. That, as we say, this is us against them, as Carl Weathers, as Apollo Creed points out. But when compared to some of the other Stallone films from the 80s and 90s, 39% on Rotten Tomatoes, it's not that bad. Because you look at movies I love, like The Specialist, sitting at 12%, Get Carter, 11%, Assassins, 28%, or maybe it's 30%, Tango and Cash is in the 30s or 40s. He didn't really make that many movies for the critics. And in some cases, he misjudged the marketplace, and he had films which he thought were going to be bigger hits than they were, such as Tango and Cash. But Rocky IV is one of those movies, it just happened to hit the zeitgeist. It was an event movie, people were talking about it, but the funny thing is, it ended up grossing more than $300 million total worldwide in its initial theatrical release, which is, again, for 1985, that's a spectacular total. For 2025, because this was not a humongous budget, I think the budget was not much more than $30 million. That's an incredible gross. It would be a great gross today, and it was beyond extraordinary for 40 years ago. But, once again, we must look inside of the numbers. We must look inside of the numbers, because it didn't gross $300 million in the United States. It grossed $128 million in the US and Canada, which means it grossed $172 million overseas. And why is that? Dear viewer, faithful listener, why did it gross so much more money overseas? Most films, at least movies released here in the US, the bulk of the box office gross is here in the good old US of A. $172 million in Europe. And the reason why, as the late great New York University film professor Robert Sklar told us when we saw the movie Rambo First Blood Part 2 in his class American Film 1975 to 1990, and we watched Sly engaging in a little bit more of what we would call jingoism. Let's go rah-rah, let's kill these bad guys, fuck them, whatever. In Europe, they line up around the block for Stah-Low-Nay. And you saw it even into the 90s with films like The Specialist, which had an enormous tally overseas and really didn't do that well in the States because, spoiler alert, it actually is not a good movie. It's a guilty pleasure movie. Get Carter did better overseas. A lot of Sylvester Stallone's movies, they just rolled it up in Europe. So Rocky IV would have been a big hit just with the United States and kind of a mid-European tally. But the fact that it made over 170 overseas in 1985 into 86 is completely insane. In that instance, he may have misjudged critics, but he did not misjudge audiences. And then about 5 years ago, during COVID, well now over 5 years ago, when Sly was, like everyone else, was on ice in Hollywood, he's worried about his family, and he was thinking in terms of he was going to move from Florida to California, or like his main home. He was moving, and he had a lot of stuff that he was trying to keep together and not freak out. But he said, movie business is more or less shut down. We're not really supposed to do anything. But there's nothing preventing me from going into the editing room and checking out some of the extra footage that I shot for Rocky IV, but we ended up taking out of the film, and maybe there's something that we can do here. So, because Stallone is not, you wouldn't necessarily expect that he would be a big social media guy, but he's turned out to be a pretty big social media guy. So he would do these little dispatches, these little stories on his Instagram, and I assume he shared to his TikTok, but I don't really know that. But he was kind of taking fans who followed his Instagram, taking them behind the scenes as he started looking at the just incredible volumes of deleted scenes and otherwise good footage, which he ended up just not including in the original hour-and-a-half version of Rocky IV. So as the movie business was completely shut down, Tom Cruise overseas, when they ended up going back to work, he had that famous viral moment where he's like, no offense, but if any of you get sick, we're all fucked here. I'm going to have to start firing people if you don't follow protocols. We got to just do what we got to do. But Stallone had a skeleton crew, and he began assembling what I don't know if he used the phrase director's cut. That's something that gets thrown around a lot. There are longer extended versions that are not technically director's cuts or even director's editions. But Stallone decided he had more than enough footage to recut the film to where it still felt like the Rocky IV we know and knew and loved, but that it took different paths to where if you have a young person who, there are some people out there under 25 who've just seen the Creed movies and understand, okay, the Rocky Balboa character that was not created for a 2015 film. This is a character that goes back to the 70s, but there are going to be some young people, I don't really like old movies, and they hadn't seen anything else. If a person who is just familiar with the Creed films starts off with Rocky 1976, Oscar winner for Best Picture, John Avildsen, the filmmaker, later did Karate Kid, basically the same story, or very, very close. If you then take them up to Rocky IV, but not the theatrical cut, the one that Stallone decided to call Rocky versus Drago, they're not going to have the same takeaway as people like me who saw the original version and have been kind of talking about it for the last 4 decades. Stallone deliberately tamped down on, I use the word jingoism, there is less of an us against them feel. And Drago comes across, as absurd as this seems, he comes across more human in the director's cut. There's more stuff with Rocky and Adrian, and you even get more of Carl Weathers' Apollo Creed, and I feel like it's a better send-off for him, spoiler alert, it's a better send-off for him in the director's cut. And there's so much incredible footage that Sly got rid of. He could have made a 2.5-hour movie, and I think it would have been fantastic. The fight scenes would have all been, believe it or not, even longer, which is crazy. But I don't know if I necessarily prefer the director's cut. But for somebody who has never seen Rocky IV, it might actually be the better choice. Because, I don't know, I think that younger people are probably going to respond better on first viewing to the director's cut than the theatrical edition. But if any of you have done what I just said, feel free to chime in the comments. So I have seen, as Al Pacino says in Scent of a Woman, but I had seen the first three, not surprisingly, Rocky movies before Rocky IV opened. My parents took me to see Rocky III in theaters at the old, not the movies at Sunrise Mall, the theater which was called the Pequot Theater, which is now an auto dealership on Sunrise Highway, Route 27 in Massapequa, very close to one place that's still there, Massapequa Diner. And of course the Long Island Railroad, Massapequa train station is across the street from where that movie theater was. So we went to see Rocky III, and I don't even know if I had seen Rocky I and Rocky II. I don't know that I actually had. You know, back then, not only did information travel a lot slower, which is not a cliche, it's 100% true, it wasn't as easy to just watch a movie. It had to be on TV at a certain time where you were home and you could tune into it. There was no streaming, and VHS existed, but honestly, if you're an 8-year-old kid in 1981 or 82, it's not as easy as, well, I'm just going to walk over to the video store a mile away, or maybe I'll take the car and I'm just going to rent Rocky I. Not that easy. So I don't know that I had seen Rocky I and Rocky II. I knew of them, I had seen clips, but I'm not so sure that I had seen the films in total. Rocky II maybe, but I don't think I saw the original Rocky until I was able to rent it on VHS. Because when you're a little kid, you don't have unlimited access to TVs in your house usually, and maybe you didn't get unlimited channels. It would have had to have been on HBO or Cinemax or whatever, you know, kind of premium channels that we happened to get back in the day. But I loved Rocky III, seeing it in theaters. Thought it was fantastic. And when Rocky IV came out, of course everybody is spoiling it. Apollo dies, Apollo dies, Apollo. The number of times I heard the phrase Apollo dies in about a 1 week period, you know the cliche about if you had a nickel for every time, it just seemed like everybody was saying the same thing at the same time. That's a thing that went viral years before there was anything called internet or whatever they were calling it in the early days of Mindspring and Earthlink. But Apollo dies, that's all I knew about the movie. Well, does he die in a train? No, now you gotta see the film. You just fucking spoiled it for me, asshole. I didn't really say that, I was 11 years old. So I didn't see Rocky IV in theaters. The weird thing is that I saw it on VHS, but my first time seeing Rocky IV was not even at home. They had, at Fairfield Elementary, where I went to elementary school, any of you know Massapequa, Fairfield Elementary is the cliche of a red brick elementary school. It was built as Babe Ruth was tearing it up for the Yankees. I think the structure was built in the early 20s. Babe Ruth had just gotten to the Yankees. And there was a lot of asbestos in that school. And in 1982, there was an idea, we're going to have to close this school. Otherwise, we might have some mesothelioma problems if we don't have them already. But luckily, they found that the asbestos it was in areas where it didn't seem to be a danger. Yeah, you know, I'm not making any jokes, but they were doing this. They didn't really know. They were taking a guess, as in the manner of certain politicians, telling us that certain areas of New York City were, oh yeah, the air is completely fine, when the air was not. But in this instance, it appears that they were correct. Fairfield Elementary had a number of what were called resource rooms. They were regular classrooms, just not in current use in, let's say, a particular school year, that they would only need 4 5th grade classes instead of 5, whatever the case might be. So my 5th grade teacher, because I was now in 6th grade in 1985-86, my 5th grade teacher, Mr. Fink, was a big fitness guy, a big Stallone and Arnold guy. He was already a big fan of Arnold, and he loved Sly, and he loved the Rocky series. And he rented, unless he bought it, I don't remember if Rocky IV was price to rent or price to own. That was a great thing. Imagine 40 years ago, a VHS tape being priced at $70. That's price to rent. They're telling you, rent it from well, there was no Blockbuster yet. Rent it from your local mom and pop video store. Unless you want to pay $70 for a cassette tape. In 1985, going on 86, it would have been into 86. So Mr. Fink, loved the guy. He rented the movie, and 3 or 4 classes crammed into this resource room. I don't even know how they pulled this off. But we watched all of Rocky IV in one shot. And I want to say that it was just before the Easter break. So my first time watching Rocky IV was crammed in with a whole bunch of other students. And you know, we were not necessarily the best behaved kids, but I don't remember anybody disrupting it. We just watched the movie all the way through. And not surprisingly, I loved it. I thought it was better than Rocky III. I mean, historically, I prefer it to Rocky II. I happen to think Rocky II in most cases and in most quarters is way overrated. It's okay. But until you get to the climactic fight, which is amazing, I just don't think the movie's that interesting. It's just not that good. So I've probably seen Rocky IV start to finish, maybe 15 times. And one of the main things, and it's kind of ridiculous, but one of the main things that Stallone did with his director's cut is he got rid of the stuff with Paulie and the robot. It's something that he always thought it's kind of funny, and you get some laughs there, but he just got rid of it. So what he did with the director's cut, the running time of the film is not that much different than the Rocky IV that we all, that we kind of know and love. But there's so many different shots and different angles and scenes that have different takeaways. And it feels like a more personal story, that we get a little bit more of the psychology of Rocky as opposed to him to just sort of screaming at Adrian, because I'm a fighter, all that stuff. That's what I am, that's what I married, that's what you married, whatever. And I think it was in 2021 that there were a number of screenings across the country, and Stallone, he may have been in one theater, but he did like a Q&A where it was on Zoom, where he was answering questions about his process and what he did. And the thing with Stallone, because he's been such a successful movie star, is that it's easy to forget he's a terrific filmmaker. And you always kind of bring up, and I bring this up a lot because I think it's important, that with all the the kind of rivalry that Stallone and Arnold had, they were not ever enemies. They were always on good terms. They were on good enough terms that Arnold set Stallone up with his buddy Franco Columbu, who helped him to get into the incredible shape for Rambo First Blood Part 2. There was a rivalry. It was a rivalry, genuinely a rivalry. But my sense now, all these years later, with the men into their upper 70s, is that in certain ways, each guy was envious of the other. Arnold was envious of the fact that Stallone got to direct a number of movies, in some cases while also acting in, as in the manner of Rocky IV. And Arnold always thought that Sly was kind of underrated, just in his opinion, that this guy's really a terrific filmmaker. Like, if he wasn't even an actor, I think I would like his work. The way that he stages the action, the way he knows how to blend, the musical cues. So I always got the sense Arnold was a little jealous. Arnold wanted to be more of a filmmaker, and other than Christmas in Connecticut, the remake, where he doesn't star in the movie, he simply directed. A lot of people really like that, but he didn't go any further with it. And I feel like there's part of Arnold that wished that he had. And we know that Stallone was jealous of the fact that Arnold got to work with some of the best filmmakers in the world. And, Sly got to work with Rennie Harlan, and there were a couple of other, and John Avildsen. But I know that he would have wanted to have made a big action movie with James Cameron, because why not? Why wouldn't you want to do that? And then the joke, of course, in Last Action Hero, where Arnold is told, you were in this movie, and the movie that the kid Danny is talking about, because it's a movie within a movie, is Terminator 2. But in the world of Last Action Hero, Terminator 2, the the T-800 is played by, this time it's personal, played by Sylvester Stallone. So each guy, I always felt, was jealous of the other's career in the best possible ways. And there's something to be said for, no matter how successful you are, you still wish you could have done more and could have been more. You think about how much incredible success those two old buddies have had, and to still think, man, boy, do I wish I could have directed the kinds of movies that Sly did, or boy, do I wish I could have been the fucking T-800 in Terminator. All good. And I think that I would, if you put it, not that you would put a gun to my head, but I prefer the original version of Rocky IV. Because it's an easier movie to digest, because all of the us against them stuff is just right in your face, and I think it's funnier, because the robot still being in there, that, you know, the original version. But I don't know. I see that both of them are like a 7.5 out of 10, 3 stars out of 4. They're not masterpieces. I like Rocky IV more than Rocky III and Rocky II. And really, the only film in the series that's not successful is Rocky V. And that was a box office hit. It didn't cost a ton of money. Stallone ended up going back to the sort of old school filmmaking of, you know, a little bit more of an intimate scale, even though we're talking about, you know, somebody who becomes a world heavyweight champion in the character of the late Tommy Morrison, a terrific fighter in real life, as Tommy Gunn. But the problem with Rocky V, Stallone just didn't know what movie he wanted to make. It seems so obvious. What do you mean he didn't know what movie he wanted to make? He thought he knew. His original screenplay for Rocky V, he was trying to apply more real-world reality to Rocky V, and to be more specific, the incredible beatings that Rocky Balboa has taken just in the world of the films in which we've seen. The Rocky I, the fight in that movie is more brutal than the Thriller in Manila. And remember, of course, Joe Frazier made a cameo in Rocky I. So I guess we're supposed to believe that the Frazier and Ali, that they existed, but maybe they did all their stuff earlier and they were pretty much retired. Because we know that Frazier exists. We don't hear anything about Ali. But in Creed II, I think it was, the Rumble in the Jungle is mentioned. So again, I assume that in the world of those films, Ali, Frazier, and Foreman have existed, but they existed earlier. That they're already retired by the time the heroes of our stories, you know, take center stage. Sorry, I kind of lost my place there. So where I was going with that was the level of beatings that Rocky Balboa has absorbed in the first film, second film, third film, fourth film. Stallone's idea was that he wanted to have a neurologically very compromised Rocky Balboa. And, you know, the sport of boxing changed. They went from 15 rounds to 12 rounds, in part because of the disaster right around, I think it was just before Rocky III, where Dooku Kim, a young title contender, lost to Ray Mancini, and the ref waited too long to stop the fight, and Dooku Kim died, and there was no reason for it. Part of it was, well, if we shorten the fights, we're less likely to have something like that, which is absolutely true. But Stallone's idea for Rocky V was that he was going to show Rocky struggling to do normal person tasks because he had just been beaten upside down and inside out. And we know there are a lot of famous fighters, Ali, of course, and then you look at even a James Toney today and Meldred Taylor, and there's so many fighters who, it isn't always that they stayed so long or too long in the sport itself, it's that they just took too many bad poundings, whether or not they won the fights. You know, in the case of Ali, the worst beating he ever took was probably the Ernie Shavers fight, which he ended up winning, but he already should have been retired for a couple of years. So that's what Stallone's idea was. He wanted to spotlight that within the context of a kind of somber Rocky V. And he shot 6 weeks where Rocky is now this broken down old fighter, long retired and struggling. And Sly, after 6 weeks of shooting, he just couldn't go forward. And he said, I'm sorry, I got to start fresh. And, you know, to the credit of his cast, nobody revolted. I'm sure they were pissed off about it, but he ended up making what became Rocky V, and it's not good. You see what he was going for, but it's not the movie he intended to make. And if he's asked about that now, he will say something to the effect of, I was never really sold on either of those concepts, but, you know, the film did end up becoming a hit. And 20 years later, not 20, about 15 years later, he was able to do Rocky Balboa with, you know, a real character, a Hall of Fame fighter himself, in Antonio Tarver. But Rocky IV is just, it's one of those movies. Even though we can, as movie fans, we can admit it's not nearly as good as the original Rocky, which is a fantastic film. And yeah, it shouldn't have won the Best Picture Oscar. It should not. That was the year of Taxi Driver. Taxi Driver should have won Best Picture, and Scorsese should have won Best Director, but Scorsese wasn't even nominated. That's about as big a cinematic Oscars crime as I can give you. But Rocky I is a great film. But Rocky IV is more rewatchable. In part because the original version, it doesn't go deep. We aren't saddled with, the kind of regrets of the life of Mickey Goldmill. Mickey loves you. I'm ready to eat lightning and crap thunder. We don't really get the psychology in Rocky IV. We don't get the drinking 6 or 8 or 12 whole eggs and going for a run in 8 degrees. That's great stuff. But Rocky I is a challenging film because the character of Rocky Balboa, as we meet him, is not making the most of his life. He's a club fighter. He's somebody who has always had the talent to be a top 10 contender, and he's just not focused. It isn't that he's even lazy, but he's not focused to the extent that almost any top level fighter would have to be. And it isn't until he gets the 1,000,000-to-1 shot against Apollo Creed that he finally starts training like the champion that he always had it within him to be. Rocky IV, though, is a sensational entertainment in either version. It's just endlessly fun. The musical cues, Robert Tepper, there's no easy way out, there's no shortcut home. And the sadness, the idea of the Code of the Gladiators, Rocky Balboa having taken all of these terrible beatings, and Apollo Creed, really, we're led to believe that until the first fight with Rocky, he mostly just embarrassed his opponents. He was kind of like Ali in the 60s, where he didn't really have any difficult fights. He just went out there, entertained the crowd, and beat his opponent to a pulp. And that was Apollo Creed. He really wasn't even in a fight until Rocky won. And look how he goes out. He can't accept that not only are his best days past, because that happens to every great fighter. Roberto Duran wasn't in his prime in the 80s, but Roberto Duran still had a very high percentage of his skill sets. Duran arguably had the longest near prime of any great fighter who ever lived. That's the exception, though. That's really rare. And the idea of Apollo Creed not wanting to admit, you can't go in there against the top enders anymore. You might get killed. And we say stuff like that. He might get killed. We don't mean it literally. Apollo Creed goes out, unfortunately, the way that he wants to, but that's not how Rocky Balboa wants to go out. He doesn't even want to go out a winner so much as he just wants to beat this guy, even though he realistically can't. It's Willie Pep, as I say, versus Tyson Fury. There's no scenario in which this is real, but in the world of the film, the guy whose punches land at 700 pounds per square inch somehow holds his own and possibly even defeats the guy who's hitting at 2,000 pounds per square inch. But that's the movies. And it's one reason why this film is so endlessly rewatchable and just so much fun and not a movie for critics. And I'm going to say the 39% is an idiotically low score because this film in either version is super well made. And there's something to be said for being able to cheer your head off, your heart out for an amazing character like Rocky Balboa. So a happy 40th anniversary to the release of the most financially successful, by far, Rocky movie, Rocky IV. This has been episode 653 of the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you all so much for spending some of your early Thanksgiving morning here with me in New York. If you check out this episode on the YouTube channel, haven't done so already, please click like, subscribe, comment, share, turn on those notifications. Or if you catch this episode on the audio platforms such as Podbean, Spotify, iTunes, or the others in which we're hosted, same general rule applies. Click like, subscribe, share, and turn on those notifications. I'll be back with a new episode real soon. Till then, come on, Balboa!